Hello, everybody, and welcome on the Good Data Morning Show. It's actually the last show of this season, and we have an amazing guest with us today, Beth Winters.
Beth is a licensed attorney and solutions marketing manager at Aparavi. We're going to have a very, very interesting discussions today about the U.S. Data Privacy Shield. And Beth is going to tell us all about it. But before we start and get to the meat of things, I wanted to ask Beth if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and about your professional journey. It's very, very interesting what you're doing. You're the first person ever that I meet that does these very interesting things. Can you tell us more how you got here?
Sure. Well, it wasn't a straight path. I decided to go to law school. Initially in undergraduate, I studied art history and comparative literature, which it turns out is not that marketable. So I wanted to represent artists, and I focused on copyright and trademark law, intellectual property issues, and worked with volunteer lawyers for the arts for a little while in the Boston area. I worked with a small boutique law firm. And we did a lot of work with artists and artist estates. So it was a great experience, but I found I was doing a lot of what I didn't know at the time was marketing for the law firm. So I was working on webinars and promotional articles. I was working on websites, but I also was able to really hone my writing skills as an attorney, and a lot of those persuasive writing skills, being able to write to a particular audience is really important in marketing as well. So some of the same skills that I learned as an attorney became very helpful to me. So then I, made the full jump to marketing in I think 2012. I had been, working as an attorney for several years, and I graduated right at the height of the recession, so it just wasn't a great time for attorneys anyway. And I found myself being more interested in marketing, being more interested in promoting intellectual property rather than protecting it on the back end. I found it was more interesting to have that front row seat to innovation, which is what brought me to intellectual property in the first place and working with creatives. So I worked with a healthcare organization initially in New York, and it wasn't my passion. I wanted to be with a tech company and again have that seat to innovation. And see what was coming down the pipeline. So I decided to go back to school and get an MBA 10 years after, graduating from my JD.
I truly believe that MBAs are a lot more useful if you do them after you have professional experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there were so many people with different experiences. There was, other people with other graduate degrees, but also, people who had just been working for several years and wanted to go to the next level. So I loved the MBA program at UT Austin, and decided to stay in Austin after graduating, but found a good niche for myself with legal tech companies and with Aparavi, which isn't a legal tech company, but we have a lot of applications in compliance and really information governance.
Well, so I'm curious. I'm curious to tell me, find out a little bit more about Aparavi. I think you have a couple of slides prepared for us here. I'll just bring them up. All right.
So I think I'm at the last slide. Actually, I need to go back. So today we're going to be talking about mastering international data management after the invalidation of the EU-US Privacy Shield. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about Aparavi. So what we do is we take all of your unstructured data and make it easily accessible to you. We help you find your data and eliminate data silos across your enterprise. So in addition to all of the data proliferation issues that organizations have, there's all of these different unstructured data types. They're challenged with a distributed workforce, with these data silos. And now on top of that, we have a complex data privacy landscape with fines for non-compliance. So part of that is GDPR under the EU, but every country is taking their own approach to data privacy now, both in the EU and out. In the US here, we don't have one federal law. Each state has their own laws. So it's becoming really difficult to keep track. And most companies will take the approach of the most onerous data privacy law that they have to comply with and just use that as their standard.
And Beth, sorry, I don't want to ruin your flow here, but we do have a great question from Kate.
Sure.
Are there any particular industries or clients that Aparavi is focusing on?
So we actually are working with enterprise companies with a lot of legacy data. Our use cases are not particularly industry driven, but we have a lot of clients who are and partners who are in legal data services. We also have in-house uses for this. So some of our use cases are more about mergers and acquisitions to accelerate your data discovery, data storage optimization, transforming your legal data services, data migration, compliance and privacy, and just enterprise search more in general. But as overall, we help organizations find and unlock the value of their unstructured data, reduce risk, cost, and create value. So we've really, our secret sauce is kind of these classification policies that we have, 140 plus classification policies that you can apply, including GDPR, CCPA, LGPD is the Brazilian data privacy law, as well as other compliance issues that you might have to be aware of depending on your industry. So HIPAA is for healthcare, SOX is more of a financial issue, and GLBA, FCRA. The New York Shield Act is New York's cybersecurity standard. So we can really help you easily filter your data and understand your data landscape at a high level, as well as with in-depth search capabilities with our metadata classification and content classification through optical character recognition.
And Beth, sometimes the challenge is for the company to keep track of some of these, and especially the PCI does change from year to year, if not more frequent. And that, I guess, with Aparavi, then you don't need to worry about it anymore because those rules are already being maintained by you guys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we update the laws with any changes, any regulatory changes, but we also add new laws as they pop up, like LGPD is a new one. CCPA is relatively new. And now they have CPRA, which is the newest California law that was voted in November.
Oh, wow.
But
are they at any time contradictory?
For the most part, they're all generally modeled on the GDPR. So I wouldn't say that they're contradictory, but they have different levels of protection. The GDPR is one of the most stringent, right? But and CCPA now with CPRA has brought itself more in line with GDPR to be stricter. But in the US, there's different causes of action that you can bring in court when there's a data breach under California. that you can't really do in other states. There's no private cause of action in New York, for instance.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I know.
So, what's great about this and what you're presenting here on this slide is I was chatting with this one company a couple of weeks ago, and what they were worried about is, it's so expensive to keep track of everything. We kind of have to really pick and choose at times because we want to see where do our most customers come from, what sort of regions do we need to serve,
Exactly.
and what laws, what regulations we need to comply to, because we can't track everything. It's just too expensive.
It is,
And
to have different policies for each different, consumer that you have, depending on what state or country they live in, is ridiculous. So we make it a lot easier for our customers to, at a high level, see where their data is and what types of data might be a concern for them. How much sensitive and personally identifiable information does the company have? How much, credit card information does the company have? And then after they know what types of data they can collect, it's kind of this like chicken and egg, right? They want to know what type of data they have before they make the policy. So now they can start to create rules for their organization and ask themselves, do we actually need to be collecting this type of information? Should we be retaining it? Is there a better place we can store it? And with Aparavi, take action on that so they can move the data, archive it, put it in a more secure location, or defensively delete it. We talk about data minimization as really important in Aparavi. So do you actually need all of the data that you're storing and that you keep backing up continuously? What is it? What's there that you're saving? So once you can identify what those high value assets are and separate it from your redundant, obsolete, or trivial data, the junk, that you can save a lot of money on storage costs and infrastructure, and you are just in a better position to also serve your customers.
Right. And it reduces their risk, right? So
exactly.
In case of whatever litigation discovery, you don't need to go through those files anymore if you don't need to store them. It saves you money, time.
Yeah. Right. So, we have applications in, the healthcare industry, for legal roles, compliance roles, but also IT in general as they're optimizing their data. Business people will be interested in, what kind of insights can we gain from our data? Right now, those insights are locked off because they're in data silos. So by creating this index of all of the metadata and content without actually moving any files, we allow our companies to search their data and to get those insights, remove data silos without having to create a whole new data warehouse or data lake. We don't move the data at all. We just read it for you and give you access to that. So you can exploit it for insights and for revenue, new sources of revenue, or for just reducing costs.
And Beth, is that even for those files that are residing on the employees' workstations?
Yep.
Or it has to be in the cloud?
Nope. We work with endpoints, servers, NAS, on premises, and we also have those cloud capabilities. So we bring it all under one in one place. You can access it, you can search it, and then you can take action on it. We make it easy for you to understand where your data is at a high level, but also if you need to respond to a data privacy request, a DSAR, data subject access request. If a consumer wants to know what type of information you have, or they ask to delete that information, you can find information right about that person easily across all of your enterprise storage without having to go into each different storage repository to search individually, saving a lot of time, making it a lot easier to comply with these requests that often have a quick turnaround time, which are like 30 to 45 days in the case of GDPR or CCPA. So there's a lot of different applications just having the access and the information at your fingertips.
Oh, absolutely. As Ravid from the Ravid Show is here, and he's saying that so many compliances in place, I can only imagine the work. The good thing with using, Aparavi is that a lot of this really happens behind the scenes. You don't even need to worry about it, and it's making your life easier.
Right, and we can export the data to your platform of choice to view the data and manipulate it as well. So whether that's an e-discovery company, for their software vendor, they can do the e-discovery review in their platform of choice, but with Aparavi's data and insights.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Jean-Francois here from France, who's obviously, sorry about that, but it does affect him as a customer because he does reside in Europe. But we also have Rajendra from India here. And are there any regulations in that part of the world that you're aware of?
I'm not sure what India is doing right now. I know that they usually, in terms of legislation, they like to wait and see what other countries are doing before they put something in place, like they've done with cryptocurrency and other types of laws there. But they're based on the British system, so I imagine they'll probably follow GDPR. There's other countries that have arrangements with Europe under GDPR. They've determined that their laws are adequate and up to the standard of GDPR. In other territories like Canada and Israel, for instance, those are ones that you can export data to more easily than the US, for instance.
Thank you, Beth. And you're having some validation already from the audience. Yes, you definitely know your stuff very well. But yeah, go on.
So
Jenna.
it's not.
We keep interrupting Beth with her slides here.
No,
Yes,
it's fine.
I'm sorry. I'm just wondering, looking at this digital transformation journey. So if a company contacts you, how long does it take to go through this journey? So from the moment they contract you until the data is ready.
Well, it can take just around 30 minutes to get your information into the platform. We just need to have a install on each of the different servers or storage repositories that you're interested in. So mostly it's an issue of coordinating with IT to get that underway. After that, your data will start populating, and you'll have access to insights really quickly.
Wow.
Yeah, I would imagine the procurement process maybe takes longer than
the
implementation. Yeah.
Right, because you're deploying it across the entire enterprise, or you might decide just to use it for one storage repository initially to see the value of Aparavi, and we have a trial that you can do with 5 terabytes of data free. So you can use one classification policy, see how it works with your data, and then decide to deploy it across the rest of your organization later.
Right. And we did have a question from David Lee here. Do you think it's best to take the most stringent? Though he's saying you've already answered it. So I like how Aparavi is so in tune with its potential customers already.
We most companies do take the most stringent laws, but it depends on your organization, right? It depends where your customers are. So if you're a multinational corporation, yes, obviously you'll have other country laws and state laws that you'll need to think about. You'll want to go with the most stringent. But if you only do business in a particular state, that doesn't have as stringent data privacy laws, then you might not want to go to that high level yet until your business reaches that level of proliferation.
Thank you. Okay, sorry for the interruptions. I don't. Well, we might interrupt you again.
Yeah, don't
That's
promise
okay.
that.
Don't promise anything yet.
Yeah, but I'm happy to jump into the GDPR and EU-US Privacy Shield. We can chat about that if you guys are ready.
Yes, please.
We're born ready to talk about this.
We had this decision last year called Schrems II, which invalidated the U.S. Privacy Shield. And after that, there were a lot of questions. What do we need to do now to transfer data legally under GDPR?
Yep.
So some companies were just opting not to transfer data at all to the U.S. or to some other countries that were problematic. We later were able to get more guidance from European law that they came up with a 6-step process from the EDPB for third country data transfers. So I'm happy to take you through those steps that really, make it a lot easier for the company to decide what to do with their data for data transfer purposes.
Yes, please.
So first, we want to map the data transfer, know the transfer. So we want to understand whether the data is relevant and limited to the necessary business purpose. That's going to be, part of your overall strategy as a corporation. You don't want to transfer more than you need to. And, to limit your risk of a data breach, right? So then once you've decided where you want your data to go and which data you want to transfer, you pick a transfer mechanism. With the GDPR and with Schrems II in this decision, they did say that you can still use standard contractual clauses and binding corporate rules. There are also these exceptions called derogations for specific situations under Article 49 of the GDPR. Or you can, if you're able to get consent from the
Consumer?
data subject, yes, from the consumer, then you can go ahead with that transfer as well.
And is there one of the 4 that's maybe used more, that's the preferred choice?
So standard contractual clauses are going to be helpful more on an ad hoc basis. Binding corporate rules are really useful for those multinational corporations that have to do data transfers regularly. So those binding corporate rules will have to be approved under the GDPR, but once they're approved, then you can use those going forward. And it basically just kind of outlines the data security standards and protocols that you're going to put into place to protect the data. So those are standard contractual clauses, and binding corporate rules are definitely the most often used because we don't have the EU-US Privacy Shield anymore to rely on. But there's also these other countries that do have adequacy decisions that the GDPR has determined those laws are up to the standard of GDPR. So there's 12 countries you can and territories that you can check if you have one of those adequacy decisions. Like I mentioned, Canada and Israel are two of those. Next, you're going to, if you are transferring outside one of those 12, you have to do your own analysis, whether the country has their own adequate safeguards. In the case of the US, they found that it doesn't. And one of the issues with the US and with the UK that they're concerned about is that the federal government can access the data, like with a warrant. They don't want to give the government access to European citizen data.
Right. I know it's same for Canada, and I work for an education institution that's part, I guess, funded by the government. Because of that, we're not allowed to pass any personal information over onto the U.S. servers because of that reason alone.
Yeah. And that's one of the concerns about the UK as well, right? With Brexit, now that they need to decide what they're going to do in terms of data privacy protections. So you're going to have to do your own analysis at that point.
Right.
And you should rely on legal counsel. You shouldn't really have to do that on your own. If you determine that the protections are not adequate, you're going to have to implement supplemental protective measures. So these can come in 3 different flavors: technical, contractual, or organizational safeguards. Technical includes encryption or anonymization. Contractual would be where, through those standard contractual clauses, for instance, you're agreeing to enhanced audits, or, you're committing to transparency. Mm-hmm. You're committing to those GDPR standards for data protection.
And Beth, through Aparavi's system there, are we able to identify what data needs to be anonymized, for example?
Yeah, so prior to, if you're planning to do a data transfer using Aparavi, which, we help you with data movement, we can analyze the data first to determine what types of information it has, if there's anything that's personally identifiable under GDPR or, CCPA, whatever your interest is, credit card numbers. So it checks for names, it checks for addresses, any of those types of information that fall under personally identifiable or sensitive data under GDPR, we check for, and we help you identify those files that contain it. Then you can take action on those files to decide, do you need to encrypt them, or are you going to delete the references, redact them with a different tool, perhaps through, an e-discovery vendor or a different type of software, and then you can take it back to transfer.
All right.
But in addition to those safeguards, you're going to also want to implement data minimization procedures, like we talked about. You don't want to keep more data than you need, because it just poses risk.
Yep.
And companies are starting to realize, maybe more data isn't always the answer. Maybe it's more about data quality. Maybe it's, what are we doing with that data? Are we getting useful insights from it? So those are part of those procedures that you'll want to implement internally to determine what types of documents do we want to retain, what types of information do we want to collect on an ongoing basis from our consumers. Maybe there's certain types that you just don't want to collect anymore because it poses too high a risk and you're not actually using it for any business purpose. That's a good reason not to collect it in the first place, and start to delete what you do have.
Yeah, not to waste those resources of time and money and storage space and everything
Exactly,
else.
right.
We have a question here from Mike Crafton. Thanks, Mike, for joining in. You guys are touching on a ton of key points. This is great. Thank you. Beth is knocking it out. I agree.
Know that.
So here's the question.
Thanks,
Are there
Mike.
highlighted differences under Privacy Shield for organizations to address business content versus HR content? Or do they just need to highlight how they are addressed in their policies?
More question.
So the Privacy Shield isn't in place anymore, right, for the EU, US. But in terms of GDPR standards and in other data privacy laws, like CCPA, there are some differences between employees and consumers that you need to be aware of when they're creating a data subject access request. And you're collecting that information for different purposes, right? You're going to want to have a policy for each when you're creating your internal procedures. How do we want to handle employee data versus how do we want to handle consumer data? Those are going to be two different questions. And when an employee does leave your corporation, what do you do with that data? That's going to be really important. You probably don't want to retain that data anymore.
Thank you.
But it does still fall under data privacy laws. So it's definitely a valid concern.
Thanks, Beth.
So there are, again, we have these classification policies that can help you to narrow down those types of information and see what you are planning to transfer, if it's problematic, if it's risky, and then you can avoid that risk. The last two steps on this 6-part process are to document your approach and to reassess it continuously on a regular basis, because the laws keep changing.
Right.
And the landscape keeps changing, and your organization keeps changing, right? And your needs are going to change about what types of data you need, and maybe your software will change. So you'll want to understand what your business needs are and what types of information you should be collecting going forward.
And would you say that maybe by using Aparavi could even lessen that documentation part? Because we're now saying, well, we're using Aparavi. That's part of our approach. Right.
Yes. Well, so in terms of documentation, you can export your search results really easily. And so that will give that will show, whether the data is kind of clean, ready to go. Once you've exported the data that doesn't have the problematic information. So once you've removed that, you can run it back through Aparavi and show that it's good to go.
And the reassessment approach, what's that regular basis? How often one would need to reassess it?
So at least annually, but it can be more frequent depending on whether you have a big change to your organization, maybe like a restructuring or merger that changes some of your business needs and purposes.
Right. Right.
I'm curious about something else that is only slightly related. When do companies come to you? After they've been sued? Before they've been sued?
Well, we recommend that they come to us proactively and to get their data under control, because these fines
They can be huge.
They can be huge, 4% of your annual revenue in the case of GDPR. And then, we're like $22 million. That's a lot of money for a lot of organizations. So we recommend you get your data act together sooner rather than later. We help you understand your data. So it's not just for compliance and legal purposes. You'll also get a lot of business value out of it. and be able to reduce costs overall for IT by removing those files that don't serve your business purposes anymore, which are those junk files. Like they could be, your employees are downloading music files. They could be things like you're saving too many copies of this backup that you don't need to be to keep backing up. Maybe they're files you haven't accessed in like the last 4 years or the last 10 years. We can tell you when they were last accessed. So you can see what are the most relevant files now and get rid of those ones that, might be confusing. In terms of data silos, just having access to that data saves a lot of time for your employee personnel. They can find the most relevant files without having to dig around or call IT every time they have a request.
Right.
They have access to Aparavi as a resource to identify which files are actually useful before they pull them. So you don't have egress fees either, right, for some of those archived storage locations.
And in terms of files, what type of files are we talking about?
So we're talking about any type of unstructured data, anything that's not in a database. We're able to see if employees are downloading documents to their desktop that they shouldn't be, that have personally identifiable information on it. Now that everybody's working remotely, it's becoming even more concerning, right? To keep track of what are your employees doing and are they complying with your internal protocols.
Right. All right.
Yeah, and so overall, Aparavi helps you map, index, classify petabytes of data across the enterprise with data intelligence and analytics. We help you transfer your data simply and securely with intelligent data migration and retention, and reduce risks, demonstrate compliance, and gain control of your data with automated data compliance and privacy. And you can find out more at our website or sign up for a trial. Try to get started at get.aparavi.com.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here first. Go to get.aparavi.com and check it out. Well, thank you so much, Beth. We do have a couple more questions here.
Great.
And it's really great feedback. Well, I would say kudos to Beth. And Kate learned a lot about privacy for sure. And as Ravid is mentioning, you are a privacy winner. I agree.
Thank you.
So Rajendra is first curious, what's the etymology of the name Aparavi? Do you know where it sort of came from?
Yes. It is from, I think, Latin, maybe. It's like
Right, to
aparar.
protect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So sorry, I'm not like Latin fluent, but yeah, that's where it came from.
Awesome. And we have another question from Rajendra, though it might be way beyond this topic. But he was wondering if you can speak a little bit about the recent U.S. European government actions hearings against Facebook, Google, Twitter. But I think it might be...
That's kind of like an entire hour-long conversation. But there's a lot of risk that these companies have exposed themselves to because they collect personal information, and that's their bread and butter. That's what they do. They're selling consumer data information for advertising purposes. One of the interesting things I saw was that, I don't remember if it's Facebook or Google, was going to stop by 2022 or 2025. They're going to stop collecting the cookies on people that would follow them from site to site. and just do these targeted groups, like cohorts. So there's some news coming out of that. I'm not, but I'd look into that a little bit more. I haven't done that much research.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were mentioning before the show that the US government is really playing with the idea now on implementing their own regulations that are
Right.
somewhat similar to GDPR, maybe.
Yeah. Well, California, usually paves the way with legislation. They get a good model in place usually, and other states have followed. So New York has a law, the New York Shield Act, but Virginia just enacted a data privacy law. So you're gonna want to keep an eye on that. There's
Do you find it more challenging, Beth, for companies to deal with this at a state level and not have something that's overarching for the entire United States?
Definitely. I think with any sort of U.S. organization, they like to have a federal higher level mandate rather than have to go state by state. I mean, some companies like Uber have gone the route where they ask permission later, and then they go fight with the state government over what they can and can't do. That can be effective in some places, but here with data privacy, you're talking about a lot of risk for not just for your consumers whose data might become exposed, but also for your own corporate data that could be exposed. So you don't really want to play around with those confidential files either. It makes sense to protect your organization thoroughly, and make sure that you can avoid any data breach.
We can say you want to aparavi your data. So for it to become a word. Yeah.
Yes. We can make it into a verb.
I'm curious, where do you gather all this information regarding all these legal changes on all these laws, given that they come from so many different institutions and countries?
Yeah, I mean, I rely on educational organizations like IAPP, Compliance Week. I keep abreast of the legal changes through continuing education. It's a constantly changing landscape, though. There's news every day on data privacy. So I just keep on top of those updates from those educational organizations that really care about these issues.
And Beth, back to my question on the federal level regulation. When do you think that might come into place, if it will come into place? Do you think it will take years, or do you think it'll be something more soon?
I think given the current administration, last year I would have said, I don't know, but I think it could be within the next 4 years. We're on. Companies and politicians are understanding the risks of data, and the law is finally starting to catch up to the technology. Now that we've had, the pandemic, where more courts have moved online for hearings, there has to be a big change for the legal industry to catch up, and for legislation to catch up to be on top of those issues. And we've seen, breaches on the state level, data breaches. We've seen data breaches at such a high level with, big companies. But we've also seen, how that can impact the election process. So there's a lot of concern and fear rightly so, that, we should have a response. And it's not that the US doesn't have any data privacy laws on a federal level, but they're piecemeal and they're, related to different industries. So financial sector or healthcare for HIPAA. There's no one overarching data privacy law that protects all consumers and gives consumers those same rights that the GDPR does. So they don't have a course of action. There's no place to go right now if they have a complaint, if they don't live in California.
Like Rajendra was saying, I mean, the data selling is not really being addressed.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's definitely a conflict, right? And that's where the government has to step in and say, which rights are more important? Is it going to be, the rights of the consumers to have privacy, which is like in our Constitution, or is it going to, be for these businesses to sell and make money?
And once you have maybe a federal level regulation legislation, do you foresee then the state ones will cease to exist, or they will have to coexist?
No, I think they'll basically stay. It depends if they're more stringent than the federal law. I would think that, in the case of past federal legislation conflicting with state, states can always, have more stringent requirements.
Mm-hmm. So how does this, knowing all of this and being an expert in this area, how does this affect you as a consumer and your decisions? And what do you suggest to us?
Well, it definitely makes me, more hesitant to share my information as a consumer. But I think more as a marketing professional that it's interesting, because it helps us to understand, what types of information should we be collecting about our customers through Aparavi. It's really, I mean, I don't think most marketing people have this level of understanding of data privacy law that they can, offer the same types of promises to their customers that we do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, like Tom was mentioning here, it's so hard to keep up with such things when you must focus on so many other things. And definitely if that's not the forte of the company, I mean, that's one of the reasons why you want to rely on a company like Aparavi to come in and help you digest some of these things.
Right. And, we are the, data intelligence and automation platform. We just care about removing those roadblocks for you and giving you access to your data, giving you that intelligence safely and securely without data movement, and helping you reduce your risk and just, operate more efficiently. There's a lot of benefits to Aparavi that are just outside data privacy.
So Mike is wondering, for organizations that seem to think this is overwhelming, how does Aparavi suggest they begin? What's that first step?
That first step is to call us for a demo and go to get.aparavi.com. But you can also download directly from the Microsoft Azure Marketplace and start with a free trial. I would take up to those 5 terabytes of data with one classification policy and just see how it really can benefit you. And if you're not able to do that with your organization at initially, we'll show you like the demo, how we can help other organizations. We'll help you with IT to get that information into Aparavi so you can take those next steps.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And Raja is wondering, at the moment, looking at the dynamic US landscape on privacy, which laws are in enforcement that organizations are expected to be compliant with? And I would assume, based on the slide that you had, it's all the 160 plus regulations, legislations. I mean, if you have data that would need to comply to it.
Right. Yeah, it's going to depend on your organization, what industry you're in, but it's also going to depend on what state your customers are in. So having access to this index would be, really helpful for you to just understand at a high level who are your customers and which laws you need to be aware of. But as always, consult legal counsel within your organization, and it's going to be more of on a case-by-case basis depending on what country you operate in.
So Beth, if you look at your past clients, is there any story of any organization that stands out? I don't know, some you saved them from, I don't know, a lawsuit or something that is, interesting and made it was satisfying for you, and it was a good experience for you professionally. And of course, you don't have to give any names.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've helped organizations reduce their data by up to 40%. To help them really, save a lot of money on storage and infrastructure. So that's really rewarding to have that high level of impact with an organization. And then they can use their budget for better purposes. Right now, there's, budget is definitely an issue for a lot of companies that they need to be concerned about. And on the IT side, they've been playing catch up, trying to just be on top of the remote work, getting their employees access to to information in the first place. That's something we can help with. I think like right now with the increasingly remote world with the pandemic, there's a lot of benefits to Aparavi where you do have access to those endpoints compared to other types of software.
Thank you, Beth. This was very, very insightful. We learned a lot.
Yes.
Yes, and it's the first time we are having an attorney on our show too, so it's quite a privilege.
I call myself a recovering attorney, so.
And it's the first one that we have a lovely, funny attorney on the show as well. So please, everybody, if you're interested to find out a little bit more, go get a free demo. Just go to get.aparavi.com. And definitely, please also follow and get in touch with Beth Winters here, because she has a lot to offer, as you know. I wouldn't assume that she's open for legal advice, but do get in touch with her, follow her, and check out her content and more of her work.
Thank you so much, George and Diana.
Well, thank you. It was again a lovely and very insightful session.
Yes, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for your great and insightful questions. And we'll see you next time.
See you next Friday. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
You too.